Welcome everyone to the Insights in Qualitative Methodology webinar series, a partnership between ATLAS.ti, the International Qualitative Research Toolkit at the University of British Columbia, Okanagan campus, and Inquiry Methodology at the School of Education, Indiana University. We are here today for a presentation by Dr. Pengfei Zhao, Assistant Professor, Research and Evaluation Methodology, University of Florida. The Impossibility of Equivalence, Critical Theory and Translation in Qualitative Research. A few words about the presentation. The presentation will last about 40 minutes and there will be time for questions and answers. You may write down your questions using the Q&A section of the Zoom control panel. At the end of the presentation, we will be sending you the video of the webinar. My colleague Juliana Barabas will now introduce the presenter.
Thank you so much, Ricardo, and welcome everyone on Earth Day to our Insights webinar. Dr. Pengfei Zhao is currently an assistant professor of qualitative methodology in Research and Evaluation Methodology program at the University of Florida. She has interdisciplinary background in inquiry methodology, sociology, and cultural studies. In her theoretical and methodological work, she draws from a wide spectrum of theories, from critical theories to contemporary pragmatism, feminism, and post-colonial studies, to formulate a praxis and social justice-oriented qualitative research methodology. In her empirical work, she uses primarily ethnographic, narrative, and action research approaches to address issues of universal significance, such as disadvantaged youths, coming-of-age experience, student-centered teaching and learning, and sexuality education. She has degrees as a doctorate in inquiry methodology from Indiana University, in literary theory from Beijing Normal University, and a BA in Chinese language and literature from Beijing Normal University in Beijing, China. Please help me in welcoming Pengfei Zhao.
Now you can share your screen.
Thank you. Thank you, Ricardo, and thank you, Juliana, for your warm invitation and introduction. And I don't know if I should say good morning or good afternoon, but I hope my greetings, everyone. And I'm going to share my screen. Just want to double check if you could see my screen clearly.
Yes, we can.
Okay, so I will just proceed, and I really appreciate this opportunity to share my thoughts on critical theory and translation and qualitative research with, okay, oh, I think I accidentally blocked the camera, with all of you. So my talk today is the impossibility of equivalence, critical theory, translation, and translation in qualitative research. In this talk, I will offer an overview of a new line of research that I'm working on recently, which is to really understand the role of translation in qualitative research. And as we, as researchers live, explore, interpret, and interrogate, and seeks to transform this multilingual and multicultural world. So now I know, in some of the disciplines, such as anthropology, researchers has written extensively about the translation of cultures. I would like to start by saying that, when I use the word translation here, I mean it like literally. I mean the microscope action of translating from the original text in one language to the target text in a different language. So I will focus on this microscopic action in which, as qualitative researchers, always and very often needs to engage, but with actually seldom talk about. I will bring translational studies, which by and large is its own interdisciplinary field itself, into conversation with critical theory in a broader sense, and to look at how we could generate some, conversations to inform qualitative research practice. I do want to say that this is a very new line of research of mine, and it's still work in progress. So I look forward to continuing the conversation with all of you on this topic. Well, I'm going to get started by, let me see. Okay, sharing 3 research scenarios. And this is the first scenario. An international doctoral student, assumingly, and who comes from a non-Western country and attends graduate school in an English-speaking Western university, went back to her own country to conduct ethnographic fieldwork for her dissertation study. And understandably, he used her native language to communicate with her participants, conducted observations, and performed interviews. Then after she finished the fieldwork and she came back to her campus and started to communicate with her committee members on her progress, she started to wonder what software should she use to transcribe the data. For example, the data is not in English, and does she have to translate the data into English in order to conduct the analysis, or maybe she should just go ahead using her native language to analyze the data. If not, how shall she communicate with her advisor and community members who can only speak English about her work? So just to give you some, more intuitive understanding of this scenario here, I put on 3 pictures from, it's like different types of, in this case, the Chinese data. And on your left is, an essay and written by a participant, and in the middle is a local guest here, a PDF version, and on your right hand side, you probably could tell is part of an interview transcript. So this is the first research scenario. I hope you could keep that in mind as we continue the conversation. And then there's this second scenario. So in this second scenario, you conducted research with a transnational social group in the United States. And then after you get everything, including your research design, including your interview protocols ready, you go ahead to obtain, to fill out the forms and to obtain your IRB approval from the ethical review boards in your university. So for those of you who are now joining us from the United States, we call it IRB here, which is, like ethical review boards. And then as you can see here, you saw a few questions related with translation on the IRB application platform. So for example, the system would be explicitly asking you whether you are targeting, I mean, it sounds like a weird to say targeting, but whether you are targeting subjects who cannot speak or read English. And also, the IRB asks you to attach informed consent forms translated into the language of the non-English speaking people you seek to enroll. And then, 8.4, it asks you to upload the back translation of the consent forms. I sent our information sheets here. So this is just some screenshots from the IRB system in my institution. For those of you who are not very familiar with the term back translation, it's probably one of the most salient terms about translation in the field of research methodology. Here is a very brief table to demonstrate what is back translation. So in a nutshell, back translation is a procedure that is performed after the research team complete the translation. So to understand the validity of the translated text, a translator or a team of translators will be asked to retranslate the translated text back to the original language. And in that process, the translation team, preferably, they would not read the original text. And then the research team will compare the original version of the, say, research instrument and the back translated version to determine the validity of the translation. And see, this is, as you could imagine, just one way to think about how to validate translation in your research process. And if you can recall in the previous slides, I mentioned that this is the only, in this case, in my institution, this is the only method, and they ask you to use to prove, almost like proof, demonstrate the validity of your instruments. So that surely raises some questions about, who can decide what is the appropriate approaches to validate the translated text and instrument, and who can decide that. So this is the second research scenario, and I would like to move to the third one, which is, again, assumingly you are working with school districts, parents, and families to understand the impact of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic on their everyday life. So assumingly your research site is where I come from, the state of Florida in the United States, and a place known for its diverse and multilingual immigrant population. So this is a mixed method study in which your research team have developed both survey instruments and interview protocols. One of your school district partners tell you that for the parent interviews and surveys, you need to prepare different versions, like 7 languages. 6 plus English versions of the protocols or the survey instruments. And now, as a co-PI in this project, that leaves a considerable part of the research design and data collection method efforts. You wonder where you could find those translators and what their roles are in the research process. So these are the 3 research scenarios that I would like us to think with. And here in the on the slides, you could see, I listed the languages that the school districts asked. As you probably have already figured out, these are just not hypothetical moments in research practice. These are the moments that I, as a bilingual researcher whose native language is Mandarin Chinese and who works in an English-speaking university, have encountered over the past years of practice, research practice, in my work. So the first scenario is how is my experience with my dissertation project. The second scenario is an ongoing project, and in which I worked with, the transnational Chinese families in Florida. And the third scenario is also it's a large-scale collaborative research project that I'm serving as a co-PI, and it's an ongoing project. So with that said, translation, as probably you could figure out, the translation have already become an inherent part of cross or trans or intercultural research. Qualitative researchers need to make decisions regarding whether they should translate, the validity of translation, what should or should not be translated, when is the best timing to translate during the research process. So just to give you like status, a number to give you an intuitive impression of like how important the translation is. Today, in today's world, we have more than 7,000 languages spoken by people. And, as qualitative researchers, we're really committed to work with people around the world of different social and cultural and political backgrounds. And we commit ourselves to especially interrogate power structures, and especially to understand, how to leverage the voice of those marginalized or disadvantaged social groups. If we do not talk about translation at all, or if we constantly, continuously invisibilize the practice of translation, just to think about, how many, groups may be left out in our research process, and how many of them may miss the opportunity to benefit from research. So so that is just really a way to say we want to I'm here really to advocate that we should take this issue about translation more seriously, and to put more thoughts into that. Okay, so I'm going to move to the next slides. And yeah, so, the next question is, what does this mean to qualitative research? The invisibility of translation. As I mentioned, if we really zoom in to look at the all the moments in which we encounter translation, and all the methodological discussion, the current methodological literature on translation, in qualitative research, we realize this invisibility, and we realize that there are a lot of unchecked and examined assumptions about how translation could be done, and what should be translated, who should be the translators here. Another thing I want to to really understand the relationship between translation and qualitative research, I think the first thing we need to think about is really to understand or to interrogate this invisibility. And then, as many of you probably have already noticed, qualitative research heavily relies on language, and there are also considerable methodological literature on the nature of language and the voice, and on the role of the use of language in qualitative research. And when I say language, I understand that very often we tend to discuss this issue from different levels. maybe from the level of, ontological or epistemological levels, from the philosophical underpinnings about what is considered as language. But one thing I think we could think about is, instead of talking about language, we could talk about languages. Because when we say language, there seems to be immediately an assumption about the monolingual practice of our research work. And instead of talking about voice and silence, maybe we could consider about voices and silence or silences, because there are so many different voices spoken by different languages, and by using the term languages as opposed to language, maybe this is a chance for us to raise people's awareness about, in fact, the fact that we are living in a very multilingual world, whereas, we are operationalizing as if there are a lot of like monolingual assumptions. So here is just another quote for us to consider the translation and qualitative research. Actually, this is from a very, very well written article from almost like 2 decades ago. And in this article, Temple and Young, they raise a few questions regarding the translation dilemma, and it raised about whether methodologically it matters if the act of translation, oh, I'm so sorry, if the act of translation is identified or not, the epistemological implications of who does the translation, and the consequences for the final product of how far the researcher chooses to involve a translator in research. So this is very interesting, because if you think about the research scenarios I just presented at the beginning of the talk, you will remember it actually matters. For example, it matters for us to identify the act of translation, to think about its timing, whether you want to translate it into English to do the analysis or not, whether you want to do it in your original language, in your native language, for example, or it matters the epistemological implications, which we could see aloud from the second scenario, when IRB ask researchers to demonstrate the validity of the translation through this idea of back translation. It immediately invoke a series of epistemological assumptions. And then in terms of the consequences for the final products, and how far the researcher chooses to involve a translator, that seems to be such an important question when it comes to collaborative research or large scale research, which we have been seeing a lot among in different fields of qualitative research. For example, especially in the qualitative health research, in order to allow in order to leverage the voices of linguistically minoritized social groups, in order for the research findings to benefit them, we always need to think about the translators. And I mean, this sounds like a pretty like delayed signposting, but I would just talk very briefly about what are some of the original ideas I was thinking that I could present to our audience. So I'm really hoping to offer an outline to put translation and critical theory in conversation with each other in qualitative research. And that is the goal of the talk today. So you probably will hear, there are starting from this point, there will be more the engagement in a roughly spoken, like rough stroke type of engagement, instead of diving into a specific topic within the field, like within this topic of translation and qualitative research. So the first thing I would really like to do is to problematize the search for equivalence in translational practice, which is very easy to understand because when you seek translation, you always think about that you want to read the translated text as if you are reading the original text. And then I'm proposing, in order to so after this problematization, I'm proposing like 3 shifts to move away from such a pursuit for equivalence. So roughly speaking, we can think about these shifts on different levels on the level of ontoepistemology. So that's more like about the philosophical underpinnings of like the translational practice, and on the level of research ethics and politics. So thinking about what is the best ethical practice in terms of deciding whether to translate or not, and on the level of research practice, that will involve a series of very situated and localized practice, such as in the second scenario, we know that IRB, although under this overarching federal policy in the United States, different IRB offices in different institutions really have their very localized practice. For example, the IRB at the University of Florida may ask us to provide back translation. But as far as I know, this is not the practice of, for example, the IRB at the University of John Hopkins University, or the practice of the IRB in Indiana University, Bloomington. Just, some brief examples about how to think about this issue from different levels. And I will start with this idea of the excuse me. So I will start with this idea of the search for equivalence in translational practice. And, given the, like I'm really trying to keep my talk within like 40 minutes. I'm not sure like how long I will go, but we will see. And so basically I want to talk about the relationship between translatability, equivalence, and different ways to consider equivalence in the current translational studies. For example, many translational theories start with the discussion on what can and/or should be translated. Here I give examples of Walter Benjamin, as like, or Benjamin in English, and Emily Apter. They are like two important translational study scholars. So they have very so they both have their engagement with this question about whether it is a text, whether a text is translatable or not. And I'm not going to go deeper to visit their major arguments in this presentation, but happy to talk more and happy to share some of my literature if you're interested after the presentation. So, this discussion about the translatability actually have profound impact on linguistics and literature. The implications of this line of thinking on qualitative research is that texts in question can be more or less classified into 2 distinct groups. translatable, and untranslatable. The rationale behind such a classification centers around the concept of equivalence. So if you go look at some of the more earlier literature on translation in research methodology in general, in some of the discussion about translation and survey research, you will see some of the very interesting discussion about, XYZ language is not translatable. So for that purpose, let's exclude this type of language from the designing of surveys. And there are like similar discussions in the field of qualitative inquiry as well. So for example, if you look at some of the ethnographic studies, you will see a lot of the keywords. They will reserve the original term in the original language, whereas unpacking is very rich meaning, layered of meanings in, for example, the language that the ethnographer uses to report the findings. And then there is this, I think this is a very interesting question about, whether we want to translate now depends on the translatability of the words. And then that is linked with this idea of equivalence, which is, a procedure in which the same situation is replicated as in the original, but the different wording is used. So we are seeking this equivalence between two languages, between the original text and the target text. And the equivalence theories really has been dominating the studies of translation for a long time. And a lot of the discussions have been generated revolving around this idea of how to better achieve equivalence. So as you could see here, I listed, researchers really try to go beyond what is considered as a semantic equivalence, namely just to literal translate the meaning of the the most literal meaning of the from the original text and into the target text. Some of the translational study scholars really have been trying to push against this idea of semantic equivalence. They are trying to look for more dynamic equivalence, such as Eugene Nida, and argues that the latter goes beyond the correct communication of information. And some would argue that there is no perfect equivalence, only assumed equivalence. In this type of literature, the ability of achieving equivalence to a great extent accomplishes translatability. So here comes the connection between translatability, equivalence, and invisibility. Because along this line of study, within this literature, we see the inherent connection among the three. But we have been the more recent, more critical translational studies have been increasingly skeptic about this pursuit of equivalence. And an example would be Venuti, when he discussed, fluence and the invisibility of translator in his seminal work in 1995, is Invisibility of Translators. And here I put a quote from her. He said, under the regime of fluent translating, the translator works to make his or her work invisible, producing the illusory effect of transparency that simultaneously masks its status as illusion the translated text seems natural, but not translated. So these are some of the effects of the pursuit of invisibility or the pursuit of equivalence in translational studies. Here marks a transition. Well, we know there are such equivalences, and what I really would like to propose, and I'm not sure like how much time I would have to do this, but I wonder, so the discussion about equivalence really assumes a theory of meaning that emphasizes correspondence. So there is this correspondence between the original text and the target text of the translated text. This one-on-one correspondence on the level of the meaning of theory could be very problematic. And what if we acknowledge this impossibility of equivalence? What kind of new space does it open for us to consider the methodological issues and questions regarding translation in qualitative research? So, as I mentioned before, I'm trying to tackle this on 3 different levels. On the level of ontoepistemology, I'm really trying to understand the theories of meaning and validity, which could tap into, the second scenario as we discussed. And maybe also it is related with this idea of, do we really need to translate our data into English in order to do the analysis just because we are educated in this normalized monolingual research world? This was like a big question for me when I was in my grad school and when I was doing my dissertation research. Honestly, when I first was introduced to qualitative research, when I was taking courses, I did the translation. What I did is I just I did the interview in my original language and I translated that, a big chunk of that, into English to submit my assignment, of course. So my professor could give me a grade and my professor could know how I was doing. And in that process, I realized the missing of a whole lot of meaning in the process and the impossibility for me to convene the rich, culturally informed world that my research participants lead me into. And of course, I also did I doubled my work in that process as well. And on the level of research ethics and politics, so there is so many things to consider, especially when you work in a research team with the translators. What are their roles? And another very interesting thing we have seen from the our review of the current literature is that it's very interesting. We've seen the existing literature has this. Some of them has this assumption that when do we need translation? The moment we need translation is a Western researcher goes to this non-Western communities to conduct research, whereas they do not speak the language that the research, like the local communities speak. In that scenario, they need to find the local, almost like cultural brokers, as their translators, as their critical informants to bridge the gap, the linguistic gap here. Well, that really makes me wonder a lot because, as I mentioned in my previous like self-introduction, I'm experiencing something completely different. I'm as an former international student, came to a Western English speaking university to do my work, to do my graduate studies. And then I went back to my home country to do the research, there are moments that I feel like I need translations, but those moments are not the moments that when I communicate with my research participants. Those moments are the moments that almost turn this assumption on its head. Those are the moments that I figure out I need to share my findings with my professors or with my committee members. And okay, the second is on the level of practice. So there are so many things to consider about, I don't think I will have time to really unpack here, but for example, the nuances about, translating in a big project, translating survey instruments into different languages. And in that process, we do need to think about validity. We do need to think about the trustworthiness. But is the bad translation the only way for us to re-enhance this or reenact this assumption based on correspondence theory? Or is that possible at all for us to open up this, like, so I'm going to move to here about, understanding meaning as a range of possibilities. This is like a complete shift from, understanding meaning on this one-on-one correspondence, from, understand meaning intersubjectively, understand when I speak, there is a range of possible meanings, and my dialogue participant, based on their cultural and social backgrounds, they may pick up different meanings, and there is this everyday communication through which we generate the meaning, as opposed to the meaning is something attached to the symbol itself. So I think I will just these are some of the things I have been working on, and these are some of the general approaches or general orientations I am moving toward. So I will just stop here to welcome questions and discussions, and hopefully this will open up some conversations, and I'm happy to share more about this ongoing project. So
thank you very much. I will now take a look at the questions that you have received. Let me see. From a collaborative, Charles is asking, from a collaborative point of view, and especially where collaborators speak different languages, this is a serious issue. I am curious to hear how issues of intra and interreliability are measured, especially if back translation is involved.
That's a really important question, because first of all, I'm trying to navigate myself from, a more I know when we talk about, for example, intercoder reliability, there is some assumptions about what that means, and in many cases that probably means, we have multiple coders in this analysis process, and these multiple coders, we want to see if we have an existing coding book, whether they code a certain chunk of the data similarly. And we want to calculate or understand this similarity to determine the inter-rater reliability. This is the case of inter-rater reliability. Hey, you know what? I would like just to problematize this idea a little bit, because I think it's still pretty fixed in terms of like how we decide meaning, where we locate meaning. in my previous writing, and I'm happy to share with you on this, I'm actually working with some collaborators to try to see, is that possible at all, just to develop this, validity, this understanding of validity more on a dialogical approach. So as opposed to, back translation, is that possible at all? We could rely on this interpersonal communication to unpack the layers and the layers of meaning. And in this case, meaning is generative, as opposed to, there is one certain meaning associated with a certain type of, like a certain chunk, part of the data. I don't know if I answered that question, but it's definitely something very interesting to consider.
Thank you very much. We do not have other questions. Everybody, would you like to ask more questions? Charles, you're asking another question. Would you like to speak, Charles? I can offer you the microphone. If you want, you could raise your hand or write down and tell me, yes, I want to speak.
Should I stop sharing?
No. Keep that slide,
okay,
so that people can see your email. Okay, so let me read the question. I don't see his hand raised. From a coding reliability point of view, have you applied, for instance, Cohen's kappa coefficient for assessing interreliability scores, since it's evident it involves group coding?
That's a really good question. Honestly, I wrote a paper to critique that. So that was, I wrote a paper a few years ago called Methodology or Methodological Tools. And in that paper, I examined this assumption about inter-rater reliability based on this coefficient. And I'm happy to share that with you, but I think personally, I haven't really done that. What I have been doing is to cultivate a more like a dynamic conversation through a democratic research process, and to enhance validity through that way. And I personally consider that is more trustworthy, or it's more reflexive in compared with a reporting coefficient number.
Okay, thank you very much. Another question just came up. Wendy, would you like to speak? If you want, I can offer you the microphone. So what I will do is I will offer you the microphone, and if you decide to speak, you just open your microphone. Okay, Wendy. Otherwise, I will read the question out loud. So your microphone is there. You can open it.
Yes, can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, we can hear you. If you could start introducing yourself, where you come from, and a few words.
Thank you. Yes, I'm a postdoctoral fellow in the Vaccine Evaluation Center based at the University of British Columbia. And our project is dealing with COVID-19 vaccine hesitancy among equity-seeking groups, especially non-English speakers. And my question is about balancing a commitment to equitable, accurate translation practices with, a very urgent topic, which we're hoping to get results on very quickly.
Sure. Yeah, you're doing some really great work.
So do you have advice about, finding balance in those two needs?
So, Wendy, can you repeat your two needs again?
So we're in a rush, right, to find out what concerns people have, why they may be hesitant about vaccinating, And so we also want to ensure that we have fair and accurate translation practices.
You know, one thing I can think about is, whether you could just investigate, and I'm happy to share, like talk with you more after the presentation, but I wonder if it is possible to understand more about the normative assumptions behind this. Because, for example, when this is why I say when we do the translation, we want to move away from this more fixed understanding of what is meaning or what is the correspondence of meaning in translational practice to think about a range of possibilities and think about the meaning as layers of foregrounded, intermediate, and backgrounded meaning. And in this case, I wonder it will help if you explore a little bit more, the sometimes very often, sometimes backgrounded normative statements about what they should do, like a certain group, what should be done, what it's like this very implicit understanding of what should be done and what should not be done to understand why they think this is now something desirable. I don't know if I make myself clear, but here I'm thinking about an approach to really look at some of the cultural and normative statement within their data to see, maybe you could look at some of the patterns to say, well, there are certain group of people, they just think there's, they make a shared collective normative statement about what should be done. And then when you take a closer look at this normative statement, you may find, this could be a social norm within that group, or this is something really influenced by, say, fake news or whatsoever, or like, those conspiracy theories, and to specifically tackle that. I hope that helps.
Yes, this is great to think about. Thank you. I'm nodding my head, but of course it doesn't show up. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Charles is asking, and lastly, from a semantic point of view, when it comes to semantic automatic coding, say, for example, in ATLAS.ti, but it could be other software as well, I assume. Do you see a possibility that statements might not easily be automatically coded, say, with positive, negative, neutral, or the same statement is likely to be coded semantically different by different collaborators? What is your opinion about this?
That, that really makes me think. I think it's almost like a future direction to consider about this automatic coding. Because, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding about this is we are trying to dive into this field or domain of natural language processing almost. I have colleagues in my program, and they are trying to do the natural language processing in a very quantitative way, which probably involves more of this type of semantic coding based on, categorization of negative, positive, or neutral, for example. I think, it may help on a certain level. Really depends on what are some of the goals of the study. But in terms of getting deeper to understand, for example, in qualitative research, we really emphasize that meaning is localized, meaning is very situated, and meaning is contextualized. And the the same type, like the same words, spoken in different scenarios and spoken by different people could mean completely different meaning. Like, for example, I will just give you an example, in my culture, like when I was in China, I grew up in this very small town, pretty agricultural type of small town. And when people meet each other, the way they greet each other is to ask, "Hey, have you eaten your meals?" And that's like when you first, I couldn't imagine if you are like a foreigner or someone who first visited the town, you would be like, well, why people are asking me whether I have meals or not. I mean, this is actually, in this scenario, this is just a way to say hello. There's nothing about your meals. I'm just wondering, for example, in a study that you really want to get the in-depth or like more contextualized understanding of meaning, how is it possible to use automatic coding? And I'm not here to say we cannot do that, because with nowadays, with AI, the development of AI and machine learning and everything, there seems to be a lot of possibilities. But this is definitely something we need to explore. And in terms of how we human beings, generate meanings in a way probably very different from how a machine generates meanings.
Thank you very much. We have only 3 minutes left. So there is one more question, and then I would like to start closing. So the question is the following: can sharing, and Pamela asked this, can sharing the translated findings with stakeholders or community members to verify if these findings have been closely interpreted correctly help somewhat with some of the issues faced with translation? Or how can we engage them in these types of discussions about translation and meaning, especially when thinking about community-based work? We only have 2 minutes for the answer.
Okay, so I will try to be concise. And I think, I also do some community-based work. Like, one thing I think we need to think about is whether we need to translate or not. Because when we do community-based work, there is a critical issue about who are the audience of our work. If our audience is just the community members, then is there if and the research is conducted in the same language as the community members speak, then do we need to I don't see the need to translate. But there might be some. So there is another scenario where I'm also very interested in exploring, which is for a lot of community-based engaged scholars, they always need to engage in this double writing process. In the double writing process, on the one hand, there is this need of using the original language to communicate with the members of the community, and on the other hand, because of all the institutional expectations, etc., we need to publish in a certain on a certain platform. And then there is this double writing, and what that means for us and what that means for our community members, like for the community we serve, I think there are really so much to think about.
Thank you very much. I would like now to ask my colleague from the International Qualitative Research Toolkit, Juliana Barabas, to say a few words.
Thank you so much, Pengfei and Ricardo, of course, for this wonderful webinar experience. I'd like to thank ATLAS.ti and University of Indiana for their ongoing support as well. And just want to mention, it is deadline day for abstract submission at 23:59 Pacific Daylight Time, our abstract submission portal for Thinking Qualitatively 2021 will close. So we thank everyone who has submitted so far. If you've been sitting on the fence or you know someone who has, today is the day. So please do get your submissions in, and we look forward to seeing you in July and at our next Exploration and Insights webinars. Thanks, Ricardo.
Thank you very much, Juliana. Would you like to say some closing words, some closing remarks, Pengfei?
Oh, I just want to really express my want to say thank you to both Ricardo and Juliana and my alma mater, Inquiry Methodology Program in the School of Education at Indiana University for your invitation, and I really enjoy the conversation here. And I just want to say I have left my email accounts there, so if any of the audience would like to continue the conversation, please don't be hesitant to reach out to me.
Thank you very much. And with that, we are going to close today. Bye-bye, everybody.